Hello again, and thank you for staying with us. You're watching Newsfeed with myself and Mphahlele Sihume. Let's get some reaction now after the North Gauteng High Court ruled that all hospitals, clinics, schools and police stations should be spared from electricity disruptions. I am joined by Nape Masipa from Mphahlele and Masipa Incorporated attorneys for more context on this particular story. Nape, pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. When you look at the events in court, the applicants were asking for literally the bare essentials in this particular matter. Hospitals be operational for 24 hours, keep schools operational for about 10 hours as well, and keep police stations open 24 hours a day because they are closed during load shedding. That is essentially what they were asking for. It is not a Rolls Royce or from the human rights world as well, when you really think about it.
Yeah, correct. I mean, when we approached this case, there's a number of applicants from varying different backgrounds. For example, you've got small businesses in there that were affected by load shedding. But, and we had to narrow down the issues in terms of the constitutional rights. So what the court yesterday did, it vindicated essential human rights, right to security, right to healthcare, and a right to schooling. Because, I mean, the case essentially for us was about the human tragedy of load shedding. There were untold stories of people dying in hospitals. I mean, we did a case recently where a mental institution somewhere in Tabomo, was, it was load shed. And when you ask, because ordinarily the Minister of Health has got the prerogative of giving exemptions in terms of hospitals. There's so many hospitals in South Africa, and the list is very limited. So what happens to the other hospitals? What happens to clinics? What happens to that? So you're correct, it was not a Rolls Royce. It was simply us vindicating essential human rights. And then the court then moved in so far as enforcing constitutional rights of our clients.
When you think about the arguments that were made in court, it would seem almost very logical to exempt, call it police stations as well as hospitals from load shedding. But we have also had previous remarks made by the Eskom CEO, that's Andre de Ruyter, warning that if indeed some of these institutions would be exempt from load shedding, the grid may collapse.
Yeah, I mean, that is the Part B aspect of the application, to say that when you track it down, it's a failure of government to ensure that there's sufficient energy supply. Now, to say that it will collapse, I mean, you need to weigh the interests. Should babies die in incubators because we are fearing a total blackout? So the government really needs to just get its act together and ensure with its full might to ensure that it does not trample upon fundamental human rights.
Right.
A blackout can be averted. There's a budget for that. So all we want is that the government must do its job. That's as simple as that.
And it's important to note that Part B of that judgment in the case was also reserved. Take us through that particular court process.
Yes, I mean, yesterday we were in court. It was an interlocutory application to force the government to give us certain documents. And the central issue that came out is this controversial 8.5 billion loan or donation that was given to us by the European countries and America. And essentially they said to us, here is 8.5 billion, shut down your coal power stations, and then go to the just energy process. And we are simply saying that on a sense of rationality, we wish to challenge that and set aside that decision, because it makes no sense that South Africa with its current form should shut down its functioning power stations and go to renewable energy without an alternative. So we are simply saying that in terms of Part B, when we narrow down the issues, we are simply going to look at the decisions to shut down certain power stations, whereas South Africans are suffering. So we simply want to understand what is the plan and how is the plan going to unfold, because the government comes with varying plans. I mean, recently there's a Minister of Electricity that has got no powers. So it's a funny thing that we are looking at to say, what is the plan? How are you going to enforce the plan? And it is simply us holding the government accountable.
You look at some of the arguments that were made in court. The judgment found that there had been repeated breaches by the state of its constitutional as well as its statutory duties, and that these breaches also infringe citizens' rights to health care security and education. You also spoke earlier about some of the effects that indeed load shedding is having on some of these critical institutions.
Yes, I mean, that is the human tragedy of load shedding. When you get a pop-up notice that load shedding is going to happen in the next 55 minutes, many people do not know what happens in the rural areas. Where, I mean, we listen to stories of women being under attack because there's no power. At robots, they get hijacked. In terms of right to security, in terms of GBV, there's a load shedding component that affects that and exacerbates the issues. In terms of healthcare, that clinics, do not get enough sufficient supply. What happens to the vaccines? What happens to the medication that's being stored in those hospitals? We never get to be told that aspect. So us was a matter of going around the country, getting different voices from different clients that tell us the actual human tragedy of load shedding. Like there's an affidavit that we annex that babies are dying in incubators at certain hospitals as a result of load shedding. That we never hear about.
As we wrap up, speak to us about what happens now and how do we see this court ruling actually implemented here?
Yeah, I mean, I saw lots of debate on social media in terms of how are you going to enforce this. This is an impossible order. There's varying mechanisms to do it. I mean, when the court has decided, maybe perhaps they might try to go the appeal route, which is probably a very difficult task to do because interim interdicts generally are not appealable. So you need to give us certain exceptional circumstances under which you would appeal. That's the first point. Now, in the event that they do not appeal, where the Minister Pravin Gordhan does not do what the court ordered him to do, we would simply hold him in contempt.
Nape Masipa there, of course, he's an attorney at Mphahlele Masipa Incorporated Attorneys. Speaking to us about that particular matter where hospitals, police stations, as well as clinics and schools may be exempt from load shedding. It would be interesting to see how that the judgment is actually enforced.